Hey everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Fred Pitsadney, the founder and president of Focus Management. I'll be presenting today's session along with Richard Jarofsky, a Focus partner. Just before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please feel free to take notes if you wish, but you need to know that we're recording the session and we'll make this recording available to all of you within the next few days. Secondly, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, so please use the Q&A feature and capture any questions you may have in the Q&A box, and we'll spend some time at the end of the session answering as many questions as we can. Okay, let's get started. 6 months ago, the tone and the subject matter for this webinar would have been so different. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale the next peak off in the distance, the peak representing the goals for the business. Richard, I don't think that we're getting the new screens showing up. There we go. There we go. Let me restart. So as I said, 6 months ago, the tone and the subject matter for this webinar would have been so different. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale that next peak off in the distance with the peak representing the goals for the business. But then with very little warning, everything changed. In the space of a very few short months, the COVID outbreak turned our world upside down. Our options, our choices have become severely limited. Now we all need to act very quickly and act decisively and respond to changes that come at us just about every day as we move towards the new normal, whatever that becomes. To survive and thrive in today's unsettling and turbulent environment, we all need to rethink how we approach planning, managing and executing our critical priorities. We need to take the tools that we already are familiar with and reshape them to fit the world we now find ourselves in. And now, how has that world changed? Well, for starters, it has shut down. Planes flying, borders are closed, people returning home from abroad were either placed in quarantine or voluntarily into self-isolation. You couldn't go where you wanted to. If you did, you couldn't get back. Buyers couldn't buy, sellers couldn't sell, shippers couldn't ship, makers couldn't make. Every economy everywhere took a severe blow to the head. And on top of all this, we don't know what's coming next. Is there a second wave? Is this still the first? Will there be a vaccine? What about an antiviral? When will it be safe to go back to something we used to call normal? This pandemic is crushing many paradigms, how we make purchases and what we buy, how we do business and who we do it with, how our businesses operate internally, how we communicate with each other, and the list goes on. In the face of this, we need to recognize an important reality. Whoever acts fastest and most decisively will set the pace. And to do this, we need to rethink our approach to planning. In fact, we need to a great degree, rethink how we think, and especially how we think about planning. RAD is our response to low warning, high impact situations with continual change, with continual uncertainty. Today, we will review RAD's design thinking and principles to gain your confidence in RAD and focus, and thus generate some post-webinar interest. Let's start where RAD came from, the fundamental value proposition for all of our work. And then we'll cover the 4 principles, tools and techniques, the kind of how-tos, and then RAD's value proposition. Every leader, whether of a business unit or a team within, wants the great execution of what matters most. Great execution, however, remains elusive. As most, in fact, it's been published that 75% still struggle with the execution of not only strategic, but operational and project plans. So where do organizations end up? Well, it's often in one of these other quadrants. Let's start with the orange quadrant, the poor execution of what matters most. This is where you find leaders with great frustration who keep asking, why are we so late? Why have we missed timelines again? Why are there so many errors? Why? Well, you get the idea. The green quadrant, the great execution of the wrong things, often leads to major embarrassment as the leader answers questions like, if we're so great at getting things done, why is the competition still eating our lunch? Why have we missed our fundraising goal? You get the idea. The black zone is that color for a reason. Businesses and their leaders don't last very long. Poor execution of the wrong things is a major reason that the majority of startups never see year 2. There are 3 elements that help leaders take their teams to the top right-hand quadrant: clarity, alignment, and commitment. Well, of what? For strategy execution, it's long-term focus and direction of the business. Today, it's about identifying the critical priorities, what we need to do to survive, and for some, it is how to deal with unusually big demands for their products and services. The bottom axis is about ensuring clarity, alignment, and commitment to action for individual accountabilities. Not being clear and empowered to take action or to make decisions is, according to published studies and our own 50 years of combined experience within 400 organizations, the #1 blockage to great execution. We'll be addressing how to fix that during this webinar. Okay, so if you put together GEM, the great execution of what matters most, with the focus being on how to get to that top right-hand quadrant, then you add the speed and agility that you need for today's business situation, you get rapid agile deployment, RAD. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on the 4 principles you can use to catch the wave and not be crushed beneath it. These 4 principles will be supported by 6 specific techniques and tools. Let's overview the principles first. First of all, engage your people in the process of planning and deploying your plan, and do it early. You know, we've all heard a lot of talk about employee engagement over the last decade, mostly empty words, as organizations are not really doing a better job at it than they were at the turn of the century. Not when it comes to real, meaningful engagement. Quickly means quickly, not weeks or months, days. Power through the execution by doing a few critical processes and doing them right, over and over again. Planning sessions should be short bursts, 1 to 2 hours long, not 1 or 2 days as we are accustomed. You've all heard the saying, no plan survives the first engagement with the enemy, or variations on that theme. Well, it's more than a truism. A plan that fails to address the rapidly changing realities on the ground is worse than useless, is downright dangerous. Agility and responsiveness will rule. The 4th and final principle: nothing stops a great plan. Achieving this success, it deserves more than the people charged with its execution having only a vague idea of the authority that they have to make decisions and to get important stuff done. We'll cover how to fix that today. So these are the 4 principles. Let's dig into each of them and put some on the bones. There are 2 important reasons to ask your people about their views and their ideas. The first is they really want to be asked. They want to feel that someone cares about what they think. I mean, in their position with you. The second reason, they know things that you don't. Not because they're smarter necessarily, but because they are often closer to the action with customers, with suppliers, and competitors. The last thing you want to hear during a debrief, especially of a failed initiative, is, "I could have told you that." You never want to hear those words. It only makes sense that if you ask questions, you need to listen to the answers. Nothing turns people off more than taking the trouble to respond to a question only to be totally ignored. Most of us have had that experience. It's not pleasant. That must not happen. It's critical to respond in some fashion throughout the entire process. Ask people early enough in the process to make their input useful. This is during the assessment stage prior to putting pen to paper and creating the plan to take the business forward. This should be one of the very first things that you do. There are a variety of tools, many available at low cost, that can be used to gather this input. SurveyMonkey is one of them, and there are others. Keep it simple, don't make it too elaborate or complicated. Ask a few questions and make it clear as to why the answers matter. We'll look at a couple of examples in a minute. Whatever information you gather, it needs to feed into your battle planning. Why do we call it battle planning? Well, for us, it conveys a completely different level of intensity than conventional strategic planning. This isn't about winning the war. It is about achieving the success we need today that creates a secure and positive tomorrow. The first thing we need to do is quickly come to grips with the situation we find ourselves in, particularly in 5 key areas of importance. What is life like today for our customers? How are they being affected? How are their attitudes, preferences, and behaviors changing? What new challenges are they having that might represent opportunities for us? Maybe their need for what we do has decreased or perhaps increased due to the present situation. For instance, the dramatic drop in commercial and civil aviation has had a terrible impact on companies that service and repair aircraft components, such as wheels and brakes. Sailmakers, on the other hand, who had the capability, have gained from the surge in demand for covers to protect engines as aircraft sit idle. What about our suppliers? We depend on them to operate our business. So how are they holding up? Do we need to be looking for alternatives? We can't afford to have a supply chain that is unreliable due to capacity constraints. As borders closed, many experienced logistical nightmares and still haven't been able to establish a secure supply of materials and components. As for our competitors, are they showing any signs of weakness that we can exploit? Have their service levels dropped significantly? Are they losing customers? Is there a fire sale opportunity out there? Maybe we can snap up some smaller companies that are struggling so that we can expand our reach. If we don't, someone else might. One of our clients, a maker of plumbing products, experienced a huge increase in demand for their products because many of their competitors were either unable to operate or had their supply chains disrupted. Their big challenge, and put this under the heading of nice problem to have, was how are we going to make enough of our product quickly enough to take advantage of this windfall? What about our people? How are they doing? This has been a very stressful time for many, perhaps all. Are we doing what we can to help them through this? For example, one of our clients shifted work hours to help those who were having difficulty managing childcare. Finally, We need to appraise our operational capability and capacity. Are we able to meet service level requirements and remain cost efficient? If we have excess capacity, can it be redeployed to other areas? As an example, look at the number of companies now making respirators and masks. Remember the survey I mentioned a few minutes ago? Well, here are a few of the questions that we ask. What one thing, and that's one thing within our power, that's really important, within our power, could we do to help you and others deal and cope better? The first thing you need to ask your people is, how can we help you? How about our customers? What can we do to serve them better? After all, a business without customers, well, it isn't. What ideas do you have on how we can bond better with them? Perhaps become the trusted go-to company, maybe even indispensable. We might be suffering operationally, and our less than great performance is damaging our reputation and causing frustration. How can we address those concerns and get better? The answers you receive need to be sorted, sifted, collated, organized, and analyzed. Look for the nuggets, especially those that might seem at first to be a little off the page. Include those nuggets in the conversation you'll have with your core planning team. Set a very small number of objectives. We continue to see organizations during planning stages set long lists, laundry lists of things to do. Our strong recommendation is set a very small number of objectives whose achievement will make a significant impact on the business. Make sure they're clear both on what they are and why they matter. And make them as measurable as possible so you can track your progress towards them. Something like this: increase full order on-time shipment rate to 96% by December the 31st without increasing per unit shipping costs. This objective not only drives increased internal efficiency, it also benefits the customer. A win-win. Do it quickly. Lean towards action rather than deep contemplation. You know, we need to spend a lot more time in planning sessions on creating action plans. That's where it's at. I mean, make your sessions short, 1 to 2 hours. I think 90 minutes is a great target. And place the sessions in a tight timeline, whatever you can accommodate. Think about doing 2 or even 3 sessions in a week during the assessment and planning stages. Keep it simple. Should be your mantra throughout the whole entire process. I mean, a beautiful plan on paper breaks down if people aren't clear on what they need to do and how the various elements need to fit to make it successful. In a moment, we'll look at a very powerful yet simple way of ensuring clarity of your plan. The most common cause of execution failure is that people don't know what's expected of them, what they're supposed to do, or the authority that is available to them. We'll cover more about authority clarification in a few minutes. Complexity is a major barrier when it comes to deciding what to do and then executing it. Richard's going to cover some of the simple yet very powerful tools and techniques that you can use. The best thing is that you likely already have these tools in your toolkit. Richard will include how to make the planning and execution roles crystal clear. Richard?
Thanks, Fred. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you some more sort of view into some of the details of RAD. And so Fred's given you a bit of an overview, including sort of where RAD comes from and how it fits in relation to the great execution of what matters most with those critical ingredients of speed and agility, which are really fundamental to what RAD is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how we go about doing it, some of the mechanics, and I'm also going to share a couple of tools that we use. And again, you might be familiar with one or more of these, but I think it's always good to even just refresh our memories as to how can we do this, do it well, and do it efficiently. So RAD has within it several stages, and the first of those is what we call getting ready, because You know, before we even kind of sit down to start doing some planning, there are some things that we need to do right up front. So one of those is to identify who's going to be on the core planning team. You know, is this the leadership team? Is this going to include other people within the organization? We need to make sure that we're really clear on who's going to be most directly engaged in the planning process. Identify the employees that are going to be surveyed. It might be everybody. In some organizations, for instance, we did a survey for a client with about 150 people within their employee group. And they said, you know what, we want to hear from everyone who wants to be involved. So we want to open the opportunity to them. In some larger organizations, you know, the decision might be made to restrict it to a smaller group. So again, important to identify who those people are going to be in order that we can distribute the surveys, compile the results, do some analysis, and then be able to feed that back to the core planning team along with their pre-work for the first part of the process, which is doing the assessment. Now, this represents about 5 days of activity, takes place typically 1 week prior to the initiation. The first working element of RAD then is the assessment stage. And within this, there are 3 major activities, each of which is an individual work session. So there are 3 work sessions that the core planning team participates in as part of assessment. First of those focuses on customers and suppliers and competitors. So if you think about sort of the traditional strategic planning SWOT process, where we look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, this is the external part of that. This is the part that looks outside the organization and says, what's going on with our customers, what's going on with our suppliers, and likewise with our competitors that we need to be conscious of and potentially be thinking about ways of addressing. The second then shifts the focus to inside the organization. You know, what about our people? What's happening with them? Operationally, what are things like for us? And then we take the output of all of that and say, okay, there are lots of things going on, but we can't address everything. We can't deal with everything. So we need to identify, as Fred said earlier, the critical few priorities of today, not the things that are very far out future focused, but in fact, what do we feel we need to be addressing in the very short term? Now, this is within days 1 to 5 of the RAD process. So if you thought about a RAD starting on a Monday, essentially, this is Monday through Friday where we go through those 3 work sessions. And at that point, by the time we finish, we have a pretty good sense of what's going on, what should drive our conversation. And essentially, you know, we've got our finger on the pulse as well as we can do it at that point in time. Well, then we move on to the next phase of RAD, which is the planning process. And there are 3 major activities here. And again, we're talking about work sessions for the core planning team. First of those is to say, we need to set objectives. And, you know, and again, not a long list of objectives, but a few really critical objectives that are near horizon. They're not a year out, 18 months, 2 years out. So not the sort of horizon that we might be thinking about in terms of conventional strategic planning. But again, this is battle planning. This is really looking out at the ground in front of us and saying, what do we need to accomplish in the next little while, perhaps the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. The second session then, which is work session number 5, says, well, okay, in order to accomplish those objectives, what are the things that we need to do? Because ultimately, we need to figure out how we're going to make those things happen. We need to identify the potential initiatives, and then we need to choose a very short list that will get done, and we need to establish the leadership for each of those initiatives. Who is going to drive it? And then the final work session within planning, which is then to focus on resources and authority. So resources is really a question of saying, well, what resources are going to be required to implement each of those initiatives and do it successfully? And then what sort of authority needs to be given to the leader of each of those initiatives so that they can be efficient, they can do it quickly, and they can be effective. They can get the job done. This is basically days 8 to 15. So if you look at sort of where we started in terms of the initiative, the initiation, we're looking at about a 15-day timeline. So again, as we said earlier, it is about putting these work sessions close together, making them very short, but making sure that we keep that momentum going over the course of a couple of weeks. So by the time we finish this stage, we've got the plan, we've got clear measures of success, we've got objectives, we've got ownership for the initiatives, and we've also defined authority. So I've taken you through the getting ready, the assessment, and the planning stage. What I want to do now is share some of the tools and some of the techniques that we use as part of RAD. And again, you may be familiar with some of these, either by having used them yourself or having heard of them, read about them, or seen videos about them, whatever the case may be. The first of these is something that we call the 3W chart. And as Fred said earlier, you know, the major focus of RAD is around action planning. We need to make sure that we have a really clear and crisp action plan that defines at least 3 important things. First of those is what needs to get done, right? The second thing is, well, who is accountable for ensuring that that gets done and gets done successfully? And then finally, when, by when, you know, what is the expectation in terms of completion? When it comes to the who, and we've seen this happen so many times, is that, you know, the conversation around the table is, well, it's really sort of a joint effort. It's going to be, you know, Jamie, but Robin needs to be involved as well. And so, okay, fine, but let's not make both of those people accountable, because that creates potential overlap and confusion as to really who's got the ball. So let's make sure we identify one individual, that they accept the accountability for that. And if we need a second name in that column, we put a star next to the person who has ultimate accountability. So that's the basic 3W chart. And as I said, those are the 3 sort of critical fundamental elements, but we can expand it. So for instance, you know, here's an example that says, well, you know, the what, the who, and the when are important. I also want to be able to identify the other resources that are required to do this. And it could be people, it could be technology, it could be funding, it could be any of a variety of things. So that's a way to sort of enhance and add some value to that 3W chart. Another really useful tool, especially these days when it comes to doing meetings online, whether it's over Zoom or MS meetings or whatever it may be, are rules of engagement. And you might think of these as meeting ground rules, you know, the do's and don'ts of meetings, rules of order, whatever the case. There are lots of sort of titles for them. And I think whatever fits with the culture of the organization is fine. But we find, especially these days, and particularly within RAD, that there are a few critical rules of engagement that are really, really essential. And the first of those is to make sure that everyone makes their point and does it quickly. You know, we're talking about short meetings that need to be very productive. The team needs to operate very efficiently. So it's not about long, drawn-out conversations. It's about getting to the end as quickly as possible while still doing a good job. At the same time, though, not trying to be perfect. And we've all seen this happen in meetings where teams will circle around and around and around, trying to get closer and closer to the ultimate truth, only to discover at some point that it doesn't even exist, that they need to be satisfied with getting it pretty close and feeling confident that they've come to a good conclusion. Keeping focused, no sidetracking, again, in the interest of efficiency and productivity. Having one speaker, which is, you know, when we are doing meetings online, virtual, whether people are, you know, together in a room somewhere or spread out across the country or the globe, really critical to make sure that only one person is talking at one time. Otherwise, it just, well, it becomes a jumble of noise, and it's so difficult to keep track of who I should be listening to, if anyone, and who's kind of got the ball of the conversation. And the final rule of engagement, and this is kind of close to number 2 as well, is the 80% rule, because it can apply to decisions. It can also apply to conversations. And in essence, what the 80% rule says is that every conversation and every decision-making process at some point reaches diminishing returns. And you say, you know what, we keep squeezing this thing, we're not getting anything useful out of it, so could we please stop? And teams, unfortunately, if they don't have that rule in place, can talk about things far beyond the point of return. So the 80% rule says simply that anyone in that meeting, could include the facilitator, by the way, can say, I believe that we're 80% there. And the team can reflect on that for a second and say, yeah, you know what, we haven't really added anything of value in the last 10 minutes, so let's move on. So that's the 80% rule. Another useful tool is something that we call Spitball decision-making. It's a bit of an odd name. Spitball actually has a couple of definitions that I'm aware of. One of those is out of baseball. And in baseball, it's an illegal pitch that involves a pitcher using, well, let's say various fluids, all the way from lubricants like Vaseline to just, in the old days, probably spit on their fingers in order to have the ball behave strangely when they throw it towards the batter. That's not the definition that we use. The one that we use is probably more along the lines of, let's toss things against the wall and see what sticks. And the idea here is to be able to accelerate the rate at which we get through making decisions. And we need to do it, quite honestly, because whatever the objective might be, there are going to be potentially long list of possibilities. There are so many things that we could do, might do, that we need to be able to work through those pretty quickly in order to get down to the thing or things that we will choose, because in our view, they're the best things to do. They're going to get us the greatest results at the lowest cost. So one of the ways to look at this is basically to look at a grid like you see in front of you that says, if we look at, on the one hand, value or benefit, and on the other hand, cost or effort, you know, this is the old cost benefit sort of view. Say, well, you know, if we look at all of our options and kind of plot them up there, let's see where they fall. Because, you know, in those four zones, you know, the top left zone, the best deal zone, says great benefit, pretty low cost. That sounds like a really good deal to me. The justifiable zone, the blue zone, is, well, you know, a pretty good benefit, but the cost is kind of high. And, you know, maybe we can justify it, especially if there's nothing over in the green, but it might be a bit of a tough decision. The why bother zone, which is the yellow on the lower left, is really things you'd say, well, it's not going to cost much, but it's also not going to get us very much. So I'm not sure it's really worth the bother. And then finally, the no way zone, the orange, which says, sorry, low benefit, high cost, we would be crazy to do that. So no, it's not going to work. And then somewhere in the middle, we have something called the maybe zone that says, not sure exactly where it falls, but we need to kind of maybe sort and sift and collate our way through those things as well to figure out if there's some good stuff in there. And to give you an example, we have a client that was looking at potential improvements to their shop floor, and a fairly wide range of ideas. I think there was something like 120 or 130 ideas that came out of brainstorming. And they reasonably came to the conclusion, we can't do them all. We've got to be selective. So they went through a round of spitballing. They worked that list down, and they said, okay, it's still a little bit too long. Let's work it down further and get down to the few things that we're going to do. So they did, in fact, a second round of spitball decision-making. And they ended up ultimately with the things that made the most sense to do. Well, once we figured out what to do, how do we keep agile? How do we keep responsive? Remember, rapid agile deployment. So agility and responsiveness are really, really key to RAD. Well, one of those is to make sure we're checking our progress really often. You know, agility depends on a very short feedback loop, short cycle. It says, I'm not waiting weeks or months to know how it's going. I want to know tomorrow. I want to know the end of the week. I want to know maybe a couple of times a week at a high level how things are going. And then maybe every couple of weeks, let's dig in a little more deeply on some things to know exactly what's happening. That we need to be able to change the plan if it's not working. You know, this is the test of sanity, is that if we're not getting the results that we want, let's not keep doing the same thing. Let's change the thing that we're doing. And then finally, calling audibles. And if you're familiar with North American football, which I think probably most of us are, you know, this is when the quarterback calls a play in the huddle and the players all line up at the line of scrimmage. The quarterback looks over the center and looks at the alignment of the defense and concludes that play is not going to get us what we need. It has a very low probability of success. So I'm going to change the play. Well, we can't go back in the huddle. So what I've got to do is call an audible. I've got to call out to my team on the field and say, here's a new play. This is what we're going to do. And the critical thing with calling an audible is making sure that everyone hears it and everyone understands it, and they all know what they need to do now. I'm going to move on to the fourth principle Fred said earlier, which is about delegating authority. And this is a really critical area, both in terms of efficiency and speediness, and also in terms of effectiveness, getting things done. It's about giving people enough authority. We use the word requisite, meaning it's enough, not too much, but it is sufficient. It needs to be really specific and really clear, and that we can increase authority in order to get things done more quickly, move more authority closer to where things are happening. Well, we use an authority equation, which is R minus A equals F. Responsibility without authority results in frustration. If I'm given responsibility for taking some action and I'm going to be held accountable to the results, and I don't feel as though I have sufficient authority to carry out what I need to carry out, I'm going to be frustrated. And there's a high probability that I won't succeed, and that in fact the organization may be put at risk as a result. Another similar equation is this one, which says that responsibility without authority also results in delays, because I can't just go do what I need to do. I've got to go back to my team leader and ask permission or something. I've got to do all kinds of consulting. And as a result, things are going to take longer than they need to take. Well, we use 4 levels to define authority rather than thinking of it as a sort of infinite variable. And here's what they are. A level 1 says, just do it. Don't ask, don't tell, just go away and do. Level 2 says, I need to tell my team leader after I've done it, after I've decided. Level 3 says, no, I got to tell that person before. And then finally, level 4 says, my authority really is just to bring a suggestion or a recommendation. And I think it's easiest to understand these if we use an example. So here's an example of someone who is going to be implementing changes on the shop floor of a manufacturing operation. So first decision that first thing that that person needs to be able to do is to spend within their approved budget and follow the purchasing policies. So this all sounds pretty standard, and it gets a level 1. There's no need to consult, there's no need to advise. The second one talks about approving new suppliers. And you know what, this one gets a level 2 for the reason that the team leader, my team leader, needs to know that I'm doing this, because someone might come to them and ask a question and say, how come you've changed the mix of suppliers? And that person doesn't want to be embarrassed. They need to know so they can answer intelligently and look as though they're informed, because they are. To implement process changes with minor impact, you know, I need to go to my team leader first, because that person probably knows more about what's happening in the organization and might say to me, you need to know the following things, and that might affect the rate or the way in which I implement those changes. And then finally, to implement things with significant impact, probably in that case, I've got to go to my team leader and say, listen, here's what I recommend we do, but ultimately it is up to you to decide. And that's what a level 4 is all about. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Fred to take you through the rest of our webinar this morning.
Okay, thanks, Richard. We're going to wrap this up shortly. Let me spend a minute or two on RAD's value proposition, pricing, and the target referral. We've already talked about how it works. Now a few points on why it works that way and who stands to benefit most in terms of what RAD provides. First of all, I mean, typically, a client that is ready for RAD is feeling somewhat frustrated, worried, or perhaps uncertain as to what to do, maybe even uncertain about the situation. That they want to identify and address their critical priorities so that what matters gets done today. And that's what RAD delivers. And you know, another way of looking at it is looking at the chart that we showed you earlier, that in fact, what RAD does is help leaders, all team leaders, get to that top right-hand quadrant, the great execution of what matters most. And it's about today's success, not necessarily about the strategic plan, although you want to keep the two in alignment. And of course, with the speed and agility, using all the tools and techniques that Richard described to you, you get RAD as a result of all those components. Okay, let's talk about the sticker price, how much RAD costs. And first of all, the basic RAD package, as Richard outlines, includes the survey, includes the core planning teamwork, includes 6 working sessions and 1 deployment checkpoint meeting just to kind of set the framework. And that price is $15,000 to $18,000. It's virtual and online. We do have a mix and combination. We could do some real life meetings too, but that's going to influence the price. The other thing that influences the price is the number of people that we need to survey. So the range is sort of 15 grand to $18,000. In terms of, and sorry, there are some add-ons here that would take it up another 5 grand. If you want us to do three checkpoint meetings, that's about $5,000. And if you wanted to do a complete new cycle of RAD without the survey, it's $12,000. Who would benefit from this most? We're thinking that, in fact, it is small to mid-sized businesses, you know, the 50 to 250 employee stage area. It is any sector at all works. It doesn't matter which sector. Richard and I work with 38 different sectors, and we've had great success in all of them. Obviously, a leader that's under pressure, that's feeling the need to make something happen and do it quickly. And that they're open to bringing in outside help. I mean, as you know, there are some leaders that are open to that and some that would rather try to figure it out themselves. They're do-it-yourselfers. The other thing is they need to be what we call process believers. I mean, our approach at FOCUS is that we do not come in with the answers and solutions. We're not like typical consultants who come in and study you and create this massive report. What we do is come in with a process, a series of questions, guide you through that, so that in fact you develop your own solution, and that's a higher level of commitment to it. And the last thing, of course, obviously, is that the potential buyer has budget authority. It's nice to be talking to someone 3 or 4 layers who may need this, but unless they can have access to the purse strings, then it really doesn't work. Okay, so that's the RAD process. That's how much it costs. That's who likely would benefit from this the most. We've got a few minutes for Q&A. And Richard, are there any questions that have popped up?
Yeah, Fred, one question so far, which is, do we see RAD as a replacement for strategic planning? In other words, would someone do RAD and not do strategic planning, or do we see them as being complementary in some way?
Right. That's a pretty frequent question. First of all, RAD is designed not to displace strategic planning. Now, because of the RAD process, you may, in fact, shorten your strategic planning cycle up somewhat. Currently, organizations are planning 2, 3, 4 years out, but based on what you learned during the situational analysis, during the RAD process, you may say, let's tighten that cycle up. But the one thing you want to do is to make sure that whatever you come up with as a result of the RAD process, that is still in alignment with the strategic direction. I mean, you don't want to get out of alignment unless what you learn during the RAD process influences your strategic planning process so it looks a little bit different. The other thing that we encourage people to do is that many of the tools and techniques, all the way from the rules of engagement through to spitballing to the 3W chart, are great tools that should be used during the strategic planning process, and often are not. And thus, sometimes those strat planning sessions end up being days and days and days of agony versus getting to the point, getting it quickly, and creating action plans. Any other questions, Richard?
No, that's it for today. No.
Okay, well, we're just about bang on time. It's about 11:44. What we'd like you to do is, you know, we set out some goals for today, which says we wanted to position RAD, our solution for today's situation. We wanted to gain your confidence in RAD and in FOCUS, and also to help us create some follow-up interest in RAD with you. So we've got a very short poll. There's only 3 questions. It'll take you probably less than a minute to answer. So don't run away. Please answer the questions for us. They'd be very useful for us. So Rich is going to run the poll.
Okay, you should all see the poll on your screens now. If you could please respond to each of the 3 questions. You'll have to scroll down, I think, to get to the 3rd one. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, folks, very much. It's 11:46, another on-time delivery by Focus Management. So we do appreciate you taking time out of your hectic days. Thank you very much, Richard, for your assistance on this. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.